common to have UFO sightings around the world come across where there'd been, large groupings of people that had witnessed something. But that never made it into the newspaper or onto the news. We weren't allowed because I tried to do it. They wouldn't allow it. The only time that I was able to get paranormal phenomena through was when I did a series on psychic phenomena for Channel 40, which was later to become a Fox station. Just about that time actually became a Fox station. But Fox, we didn't know anything about Fox or any agenda at that time. It was just, a company who came and bought it.
Right.
But at that time, I had an open-minded news director who was a very, very astute gentleman, a real news gentleman, older man, the kind that used to run the newspapers, where you had editorial staff that was intelligent and deep, and you sent people out on investigative stories and so forth. Well, he was one of those men. And I said, look, psychic phenomena is rising in public interest. I know a couple of people in this field that are dealing with, for example, the police department on cold cases. Why don't we build a series around it? Well, to get to that, I did build a series around it, and in my research, it took me to some of the experiments that were happening behind the Iron Curtain in the Soviet Union, which led me to a team of researchers, kind of ESP researchers at Stanford Research Institute, which is, of course, Russell Targ and Keith Harari at the time.
Yeah.
So this led me to Russell Targ in 1984 or 5. He and I were trying to determine that the other day. Lo and behold, I did a show with him about a month and a half ago on the declassified information about his training of spies in remote viewing that was happening way back then when I first met him, did a show on him for the Sacramento news station, which was very, very rare in that day. In fact, 2020, I think, did the only other story, and they didn't do it to his liking because I found out he had the only remaining tape of the report I did on that phenomena, and he shared it with me from back in, like I said, 1984 or 5. So in my recent interview with him, I tagged on at the very end that original news report from 30-some years ago. And so my news director allowed me to do these things, but it opened my mind hugely in the day. And now I was already exploring and having experiences in exploring metaphysical materials, but this opened it into the arena of where science meets the phenomena. Because you're talking about heavy-duty scientists, nuclear. He's a nuclear physicist. The people around him involved were all highly educated, and they were being funded by the CIA to teach this skill or science to others to remote view on behalf of the CIA, which, of course, is very clandestine, top-secret remote viewing. So when we interviewed Russell Targ, the thing he spoke about that really blew my socks off back then, 35 years ago, and you can appreciate this, Cynthia, because of the work you do, and time jumping and such. And it was this. When they chose the target to view, which the woman did view successfully, and it was all recorded on tape, and the Soviet Academy of Sciences was in the room recording it as well. This was before the fall of the wall, right? This was before perestroika. The Soviets and the U.S. intelligence communities were collaborating, and scientific communities were collaborating on ESP research. It was just that virtually no one knew. I was very, very lucky to get this show onto the news. But what blew my socks off was that when they chose this target, which she viewed very accurately, he later revealed that target had not been chosen until 3 hours after she viewed it.
Right.
Now that's your domain, and this is what people have the hardest time with.
And this brings it current because
Well,
go ahead. Sorry.
You go ahead. This is your purview.
Well, yes, I know Russell Targ, and I also I coordinate conferences with Foundations of Mind, and Russell Targ did give a presentation linking some of the physics, the quantum physics theories and interpretations to explain these sorts of what you might call, time. Well, it's very interesting with, what term you use to refer to this as, but some people would call it retrocausality, although that can get a little bit contentious. But the idea is that a decision at some point in the future can absolutely affect the present moment as well as the past. You're right. So this is very interesting. And I'm so glad that you were, again, such a stalwart supporter of real ideas, regardless of material value to commercial interest, which is what's driving most of our news network right now. And it has been for years. So I think this is a big story. Yes. And I love that about you. You've just been you've dedicated your career to, bringing information forth regardless of what the sponsors might be wishing for. So,
well, that is true, and there is, it's a select audience, but there is an audience of people who are like-minded, who are also open-minded, who are looking for evidence. And honestly, a lot of what happened when I started Conscious Media Network in 2004 with my former husband, Scott Meredith, was I was looking for the scientific validations for the experiences I'd had in the past, and also for the information I had already been exposed to, such as that with Russell Targ and the notion of the nonlinearity of time and causal effect and so forth. I wanted to know more about it. So I figure if I put a camera in front of people, I can create an archive of really useful information that will give people the courage to open up to new possibilities and not see life as so tightly scripted, because it's not.
That's right. And I love the quote you have in your book where you state, "It is these inexplicable experiences that are at the foundation of my choices, interests, relationships, and even professional life. I choose to live side by side with the infinite aspect of myself, my soul, and other sources of intelligence which give me guidance and share profound wisdom with me for my own growth and clarity." I'd love if you could share anything about this life philosophy, how it blossomed, and how it's, obviously it's grown through the years.
Yeah, I'd be happy to. Again, this is something that emerged over time. I wasn't one of those little children that had apparitions at the foot of my bed talking with me, that was digging, frantically into text from an early age to try to understand the mysteries of life. That wasn't me. I was in my bubble. I was more of an artist and a dancer. I loved, singing. I wanted to bake. I mean, I was really kind of very typical in the sense I was living the artistic life in my head. I liked science insofar as I could draw parts of the body or the anatomy of a bird or something. But again, it had to be through this kind of visceral, up-close artistic lens. So that was my life. I did have some I had some strong questions regarding the veracity of what I was being told in Sunday school. And I think that came out, that was pronounced fairly early on. And I would say really, that was just more as a spirit, as a human being. I found the notion that there's an exclusivity in belief systems to be not only exclusionary but cruel. And I remember asking my mother when I was very little, "Mom, how can you say that a baby born in China who doesn't have a chance to learn about Jesus is going to hell?" And she said, "Well, no one said it's fair." And that was the end of that discussion. And I thought, well, no one said it's real either. So that was it for me. I even mentioned this in the book when it came to religion. I was in it for the cookies and Kool-Aid at the end of the service. Those messages of exclusivity did not register well with me at all because I felt it very exclusionary and unfair. And so already I'm set off on a different direction. And fairness was always a really big issue. Kindness was a big issue. I didn't like seeing people hurt. I would stand up for people who were being bullied on the play yard. Even if I was scared, I just couldn't stand watching cruelty, no less the thought that countries fight each other in the name of God or their own, regional deities and such. That never made sense to me. So I unhooked from religion at a very early age. And when I did think of Jesus, which, I mean, I was raised a Lutheran and everything was centered around Jesus, I thought, I believe that you were probably a very wonderful person. It sounds like from everything, I've been told in Sunday school, you're probably a very wonderful person, and I'm very embarrassed for what human beings are doing using your name. That was the main thing that I felt. I'm embarrassed for what we do in your name, whoever you are.
Right.
Okay? And so that was the beginning religious/spiritual orientation to life. But what started happening later, in the years of my late 20s, early 30s, I did start having some experiences. I found that when I went into, at that time there was a lot of psychic phenomena blossoming in the Sacramento area in terms of workshops, metaphysical newspaper, and so forth. It was a big time for channelers to emerge. For example, Ramtha, a lot of well-known channelers. Jean Dixon, as an astrologer and psychic, she started rising. It was a big time in the 1980s, so it was out there. And so I went to this one particular woman's a series of classes on a variety of psychic phenomena, and found that it was pretty easy to do. It didn't really matter what the class was. I was better at some classes than others. But I could usually participate at a reasonable level of performance, and I didn't know why. And I just took it for granted that that's how you do it. And then there came a time when I was requiring more direct communication, or I was desiring more direct communication from whatever these unseen forces were, these guides were in life. And I had already been turned on to channeling with the particular being I mentioned in my book at that time. So I was comfortable with that. I was comfortable with receiving information from unseen forces, and in this case, a channeled source of information through someone who's obscure and has always been obscure. And so as I listened to it, the one thing that this being would always say to me was, go look at this for yourself. You're perfectly capable. And I didn't like that because, like everybody, I wanted some nice, quick and easy answers and fixes on things, right? Wanted to know how my love life was going to turn out, or a certain, position I was trying to manifest with my work. The garden variety stuff people go to psychics and channelers for, and I was no different. But they kept saying, go look at this for yourself. And I thought, but I don't know how. And so that's how we left it. So I would go in and start looking, and I do explain, and I won't go into great detail right now, but I do explain in the book how I happened to create a more direct path to my guidance. Right. Now, that said, I have to say, that one had a hallmark. There was a particular hallmark and energetic imprint of it that I looked for when I was looking for information. I'd go into a meditative state, wait for that particular feeling to show up, and then I knew I was in touch with a particular source of information. It's always conjecture as to who we're talking with, and one has to be careful about that. You have to gain trust and consistency of messaging and so forth. I think it's important to develop that before you take anything to the bank. And I found that even though I would be given consistent information, I wouldn't always take it to the bank. I would say, let me just tuck that away and see how this bears out. So I'd do a little trial and error on it and see how it would bear out, especially if I was putting myself on the line in front of other people. I didn't like doing that. I didn't want to be made a fool of. I didn't want to be wrong, right?
Well, I would love to ask, just interject a question here, because before we go off, because this is perfect. You mentioned that we have to be careful, but do you have a quick recommendation for people who want to listen to their inner voice, their intuitive insight, and they want to make sure that they're hearing good, positive, helpful connections rather than negative, lower vibratory ones? Yes. Just a quick tip, not the full instruction booklet.
No, this is quick. This is really quick.
Okay.
I've said this publicly before, where all of the world is divided in worship of their gods, and I have said no god worth their salt will ever have you bend before them, bow before them, or beg. Okay, that's not how the graciousness of the universe works. any kind of higher influence is always going to encourage you to stand on your feet, have your highest interest in mind. It's never going to deliver a message that is disempowering to you or others.